All right, guys. So, welcome to the Cloud Sherpa podcast. We are here talking with Evolve IP in episode two, and we're really talking today mainly about cybersecurity, but as it relates to the cloud. So, I have a couple of guests here today in Kevin Sullivan, who is one of the senior solution engineers at Evolve IP, and then also Zach Anderson, who is marketing extraordinaire over there at Evolve IP. And Zach's going to be here for backup if we need some clarity around some of those Evolve IP solutions. Zach, I don't know how much we'll really dive into your expertise, but you guys want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, happy to do so. So again, Derek, thank you for having us on. Kevin Sullivan, I'm the director of solutions engineering for Evolve IP. I'm a little disappointed I didn't get extraordinaire attached to my descriptors today, but that's okay. So we'll pass over to Zach if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yep, I am Zach Anderson. Thank you, Derek, for having us. I'm excited to get into the topic today. Um, interested to see where it goes. Security is such a hot topic today, and there are a lot of security and adjacent security solutions out there. And so we're hoping that we can uh, get into how Evolve IP tackles that conversation. So looking to get into it.
Cool. So I will share a couple of quick slides, talk a little bit about what we do, how we relate to this, topic and this solution. And then I'm going to really kind of turn it over mainly to Kevin because I want to get his take on cybersecurity, how it relates to the cloud. And then we'll even talk about how that relates to the whole discussion of disaster recovery as a service or data loss prevention, because that's what we're seeing a lot in the market today. So let me dive in real quick and I'll do a screen share here. So, who are we at Vocal Point Consulting? My name again, Derek Roush. I'm the president of Vocal Point Consulting. We've been in business since 2010, and really our forte is mainly around advisory. We come to the table and if you said, hey, I want to find a new cybersecurity solution, my first question is why? And then we'll figure out, what are the drivers for that solution. Then we'll build business outcomes around it and put together a scope of work, help, clients really find the right solution, not necessarily a solution that just looks great on paper. What we tell our clients all the time is stop dealing with direct salespeople because there's a great advisory community out there. Even if you're not doing business with Vocal Point Consulting, there's a ton of great advisors out there that can step you through that solution without giving you spin selling, without shoving a square peg into a round hole or just trying to retire a quota. That's not us. We want to really build solutions for our clients and stay with them throughout the entire ecosystem. So how do we do that? We do that in a few different areas. Number one, we want to help come in and do a full audit if need be. Not always do we have to do it, but a lot of times that audit will lead into what we call a whole life cycle management solution where we can track hardware, software, uh, cloud spend, telecom spend, and really understand from a spend perspective where you're at, but also understand even down to MAC addresses and IP addresses and circuit IDs so that we can have a full picture of what's going on and lead you through that journey to digital transformation or whatever you guys want to call it that you're trying to achieve, right? So the other way that we're doing that is we get into the planning phase where we're putting together scopes of work. We're helping clients figure out the why and building around that why. And then we'll bring the solution providers to the table that are going to solve for that problem. Then we really get into the whole vendor procurement where we're bringing those guys in, doing the demonstrations, being a client's advocate and asking the tough questions of those vendors, and then trying to figure out, what's going to be the best solution going forward. So next, we're really getting into contract negotiation. We're going to really dig into SLAs. We're going to insert term and termination clauses if we have to. We get down to the nitty gritty in those contracts so that we can make sure that it's written just as well for the customer as it is the supplier, and we don't want one-sided contracts. And we don't want you getting in a bad relationship that you can't get out of. So then we get into the project management of it, where we're really helping clients make sure that that solution gets installed correctly. And then if clients want, we have an RMM tool where we can come back and do the remote monitoring and management, and they can see all their circuits, uh, and we can proactively monitor and manage those circuits. So that's us in a nutshell. I'm told you I'd be pretty brief. I'm going to turn this over to Kevin a little bit because Kevin, um, we see a lot of cybersecurity in the market today. In fact, almost everything we get into, even if it's a voice solution, there's usually a security component tied to it, right? So when we talk about security, um, these days, mainly we're talking about how it relates to the cloud.
Mhm.
So there are on-premise solutions, but I want to relate this to the cloud and get your take on why a lot of engineers like you guys at Evolve IP think that we can build a better mousetrap inside the cloud. So talk to me about, where we're at with cybersecurity these days and how it relates to cloud.
Yeah, absolutely, Derek. I think you teed that up perfectly, right? Because especially now more than ever, we see security as the underlying driving force behind pretty much all of the decision making that our prospective customers and customers are doing. And it makes a ton of sense. I know we talked a little bit in our previous conversation about the nature of the industry has changed, and certainly the nature of how we all work has changed dramatically in the last 4 years. That hopefully doesn't come as a surprise to anyone. But the willingness and necessity to embrace a hybrid or remote workforce has opened up a ton of threat vectors that may have previously faced our organizations with things like remote users and VPN access and extending our internal corporate network out into the world, but certainly not in the volume that it's been in the last 4 years. Right? We just saw an exponential increase in folks needing to work remotely and all the challenges that come along with that. So, how does that all factor into kind of a cloud centric conversation, right? Like, what about cloud adoption, cloud technologies, cloud solutions has really driven that security conversation forward? Or why is cloud, maybe put differently, why is cloud a bit more appetizing for folks that have that security consciousness coming into the decision making process of their solution design? To me, it really comes down to a couple key things, right? So, I'm an inherent believer that manageability equals security, right? The more easily I, as an IT department, as an IT administrator, as a systems administrator, the more easily I can manage something, whether that's a system, whether that's a process, whether that's a person, the easier I can make that secure. So when we talk about cloud, we're really talking about centralization, modernization, and simplification, right? If we can centralize our systems and where they run to do so on a modernized platform that is more easily managed, we can then simplify the way our people interact with their technology. So how do my users run their applications? How do they work with their data? How do they manipulate the things that they need to do in the course of doing their job on a daily basis? So we talk so much about a myriad of different cloud solutions, right? Things like DaaS, things like IaaS, so infrastructure as a service, desktop as a service, disaster recovery, business continuity, backup, you name it. We talk about all those things, and none of them themselves are security products or security solutions, right? It's not like going and buying an off-the-shelf antivirus platform. But every single one of those things lends itself to the security posture of an organization, right? So we want to make sure that we're thinking of, how can something like an end user computing solution like desktop as a service make my organization inherently more secure, even though DAS is itself not a security solution. And I think there are a lot of really great conversations to be had there, kind of across the full spectrum of those different silos of solutions. You had specifically mentioned disaster recovery and business continuity, right? And I'm a huge proponent of, by virtue of working in cloud, by working with a cloud service provider and for a customer organization, taking a strategic approach to how you deploy those cloud solutions and resources, business continuity is basically effectively built into cloud adoption. right? By virtue of not running my things where my people are, right? Whether that's, my users are connecting to desktops that are hosted in a data center elsewhere. My users are manipulating applications and data that lives on a server that's hosted elsewhere. Now we're automatically reducing the threat of losing a site, losing your in-house data center, losing your connectivity, and able to, a mobility strategy, right? The ability to have your people work hybrid or remote is a business continuity strategy because it allows you to maintain continuity of operations regardless of how your users end up having to function at the end of the day.
So let me
So,
ask you
all
this real quick, Kevin. On that
sure.
note, when we're talking about business continuity, let's say I'm a customer, I've got some of my employees working at home. I have no idea what kind of internet connection they're on. Maybe it's a bring your own device type of scenario. But then I also have multiple locations. So, from a business continuity perspective, how do you guys say quarantine something if, let's say, I've got a end user that gets affected at home, or I
Mhm.
get one location that gets infected, and I don't want that infecting the rest of the environment or even my cloud for that matter. So how do you guys, or the cloud in general, this may be just an overall architecture, discussion, but how do we quarantine that? How do we fix that?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, and I already can't wait for, the whole turnabout is fair play because I know you have a maybe I shouldn't say a great story on that because for the people who had to kind of suffer through it, I know the experience probably wasn't great, but I know you have an incredibly interesting story from some of the things that you've seen there firsthand, that I want to make sure kind of come back to. But in that situation, it really is a good question, right? So, how do we take remote devices that are becoming an extension of our internal networks in order to enable people to work remotely? And how do we ensure that a compromisation of that remote device doesn't spread itself into the rest of our environment? The good news is now with a solution like DAS, right? So if we virtualize your end user computing and you run in a virtualized desktop that's hosted in the cloud, right? Hosted in someone else's data center, whether that's Evolve IPs, whether that's a hyperscaler like Microsoft Azure. What we're really doing is we're basically saying, look, that end user device, for all intents and purposes, kind of doesn't matter. It does in that that is now a gateway that your folks are going to use from a productivity perspective, that they'll need that device to connect to their remote desktop, but all of the work that they're doing internally within your company, right, in your network, in your organization, all that stuff is now happening in that virtual desktop. So we can think of that virtual desktop in a containerized fashion, right? Everything that's happening within there doesn't really have any hooks into that local device, aside from the fact that that local device is running a client application, which it uses across the internet to connect to that virtual desktop. But that client device is no longer part of your VPN, right? That's no longer becoming an extension of your internal network. So any compromisation that happens there doesn't have an ingress point to get to your internal network to spread to other devices, other users, other locations. So we're basically saying we put you in a position where your data never has to leave the data center. So you're not worried about data loss, you're not worried about data compromisation. And all of those different external edge devices that now connect in, sure, you want to make sure they're still managed and secured so that your user doesn't lose the ability to basically look in the window to do their work. But if that device is compromised, user can just fix or replace that device or move to another device and ultimately not have any of your internal systems affected as a result of that. So, Derek, that said, I know you kind of have the maybe the antithesis story here of a situation that I think you shared with us where that maybe didn't necessarily go as planned for an organization. I'm not sure if they were doing VPN, but maybe if you wouldn't mind kind of go back through that case for us.
Well, we've actually got, so we had three different scenarios that happened not too long ago in the last few years, and one of them was a ransomware where client did not have a backup of that data, and they actually had to pay the ransom. Luckily, they did still get their data back, right? Sometimes you pay the ransom and you don't get it back. Uh, that would stink.
Mm.
Um, but then we had another client that got ransomware. They were a law firm. Somebody clicked on the wrong PDF or something like that. And luckily, they did have a backup. And they basically just gave the hackers the middle finger and said, we're good, thank you. And they were able to stand everything back up, and they were okay. But we actually had another scenario that was really bad, where we did have this is kind of an early cloud um, customer where the cloud was still pretty new. We're talking 8, 9 years ago. And a lot of clients weren't doing true desktop as a service. This client was doing full IT as a service,
Mhm.
and they actually got hacked. Somebody clicked on the wrong email, and the virus actually not only spread throughout their organization, it spread to that cloud solution provider, where the cloud solution provider had to actually rebuild part of their data center. So it was a very costly, mistake that somebody made. So with that said, what I want to ask you, Kevin, is how, how do how do clients approach this? Should there be, say, a learning component on the front end? So that awareness campaign of, hey, as an employee, when you're here, what do you click on? What don't you click on? How do you identify bad actors?
Mhm.
Because you're seeing real sophistication there, where some of the emails look really legit, or it could be from a supplier that you're truly doing business with, and you click on the wrong thing. But there's the awareness piece, but then there's the everyday, say, SIEM solution that a lot of clients are looking at, or a true SOC, where somebody's putting eyeballs on it. So, how do clients approach this, and what's your advice around that?
Yeah, so training is of paramount importance, right? There's no getting around that. So yeah, there are a lot of organizations out there that really specialize in helping to train end users to not succumb to phishing attacks, not succumb to spear phishing attacks, make sure they're you know, not executing questionable attachments in email or other threat vectors that are out there. But as important as training is, and I'm going to dig deep into my grammatical bag here, right? A layered approach to security is importanter. Um, and the reason for that is, look, I'm not a believer of like, oh, yeah, there are two types of companies that are out there. Those have been compromised and those that will be. You hear a lot of folks say that. And look, that might be the reality, but I don't know. There's no sense to me in looking at it that way. It's more, how can we as organizations take a layered approach to security to ensure that in any situation we're covered? Right? Because the folks that are out there that want to attack organizations, if they really want to find a way in, they likely will find a way in. Whether that's through a technical means, whether that's through some form of technical compromise, whether that's, people engineering and people hacking to get someone to do what they want to do. So to me, it's, I like this idea of, look, if you can avoid a problem, avoid it, right? If you can just build your systems and solutions and your data and structure it in such a way as you never have to worry about these things, great. I don't believe that's realistic. So if you can avoid a problem, defend against it. So make sure that you have things like antivirus in place, passive antivirus, active antivirus, training for your users so that they can take a more active approach to their security and the hygiene of their data and the way that they use their systems. If you can't protect against it, be able to recover from it. So that's where we then talk about things like ensuring that you have adequate backup, ensuring that you're doing an offsite copy, ensure that you're following the 3-2-1 rule, right? So three backups of your data, 2 copies on site, one of which is inviolable, and 1 copy that exists somewhere else that is just completely removed from everything in an offline capacity. Um, and then lastly, making sure that you have things from a disaster recovery and business continuity perspective. And to me, that kind of comes back to training too, because one of the areas where I see folks kind of trip up the most there is we as an industry have intertangled all of that terminology so that, backup and disaster recovery and business continuity aren't all necessarily the same thing. They all fall under the same heading, but it's all about, am I looking at data survivability? Is it important to me that I can get back my data, however old it is, and be functioning in a semi-reasonable amount of time? Or is it more about operational continuity where, hey, I don't really care about stuff that's a week old, a year old, 2 years old. I need to be able to recover data that's minutes old and be up within minutes or hours as well. So,
So let me ask
blending
you
that
on
technology.
that note, Kevin, because when you're talking about how much downtime you can afford, do you guys step clients through, or do you recommend that they figure out what is that, you know, amount of downtime that I can afford,
Mhm.
or the amount of data that I'm willing to lose? And, I don't want to get into all the terminology and confuse people, but talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so yes and no, right? So we do engage in those conversations ourselves as part of our business continuity and IT resilience solutions and offerings. However, um, for us, there are really only three options. So it's either, we offer a 24-hour recovery period, a 4-hour recovery period, or you can run in an active capacity if your application supports it to, do things like SQL clustering, always on,
So
where
let
auto
me ask you
failover.
though, what if a client comes to you and says, "Hey, I'm in the financial industry and I need a 2-minute RPO. So my recovery point objective is 2 minutes. That's the amount of data that I'm willing to lose."
Mhm.
How do you approach that? Or are there workloads that you guys can work with? Say if they're, you know, utilizing AWS or Azure or GCP for that RPO, can you guys work with that from a DRAS perspective, or your desktop as a service? Can they work hand in hand to meet that kind of an RPO?
Yeah, we can. Now desktop as a service is gonna probably be a little bit different because to me, disaster recovery around end user computing is more about accessibility and the ability to stand up desktops than actually worrying about replicating anything that's on them. Because if you design a DAS solution the right way, data is never gonna live on those desktops in a meaningful way anyway. So if you lose the desktops, you kinda don't care because you can just provision new ones on the spot and spin them up immediately. So that piece is actually easy. When it comes to RPOs around, more kind of infrastructure-y things like application servers, file servers, database servers, look, the reality is you can have the most aggressive SOA you can possibly conjure. The science and the art in the conversation is making folks understand that to do so can be incredibly costly. So you want to make sure you really understand, like, what are your internal tolerances for both data loss and time loss, right? So we want to talk about like recovery point, which is how old is the stuff I'm bringing back, and recovery time, which is, hey, I might be bringing stuff back that's 2 minutes old, but it might take me 10 minutes to do it or an hour to do it. So those two things together is what forms your SLA around disaster recovery. So you can have as aggressive an SLA as you want. You can restore data that is seconds old, and you can do so in an hour, 4 hours, 24 hours. You can restore data that's 24 hours old and do it in 5 minutes, an hour, 24 hours. It really comes down to almost like a system by system approach, right? Like everybody who hasn't done this before enters into these conversations with this concept of usually, hey, I want to protect everything within my environment to the same level, right? So we're going to just take everything and I want to restore everything for back, going back 10 minutes, and I want to be able to do it within an hour. That's achievable, can be realistic, but it's probably not necessary, right? If we think about it, right, like in my home here, I have locked doors, I have a security system, and I have a safe. Well, my most valuable things I keep in the safe that is in a room that's behind that security system, is behind that locked door. I could keep everything I own in the safe, but it's impractical, right? It wouldn't make sense to take that approach. And I think we have to look at our data the same way, right? Like organizations need to challenge themselves going into these conversations to really have a firm handle on kind of where their data is, what their data is, what's their most privileged and protected information. And you really want to take a tiered approach to how you look at things like disaster recovery to, yeah, have the most aggressive timelines on those types of things, but you may have like a financial application or an accounting package or a CRM solution that you can afford, some data loss. It might not make sense to have to necessarily have that protected to the same level that you would have, EHR or, patient health information or, patient identifying information if you were in the medical space.
Right.
So really firmly understanding what the nature of your data and your applications are, and then being able to internally prioritize those aligned with your business objectives of failover, and not take an all or nothing approach.
So does the priority of that data, does that lead you into those discussions around, because and the reason I'm asking this is we have a lot of clients coming to us asking about data loss prevention.
Mhm.
So maybe you could even clarify what's the difference between DRAS and data loss prevention, and how does cybersecurity, you know, play into that entire discussion?
Yeah, so in my experience, data loss prevention, or you'll see it like listed as DLP a lot because we love acronyms here.
Right.
So a DLP solution is usually structured more toward how do I stop certain types of data from actively leaving my organization in real time. So it's not so much about recovery and preventing the loss of data from a disaster recovery perspective of like, hey, if my stuff's compromised or I lose a system, how do I get it back? It's more how do I stop Zach from sending out an email that has Derek's social security number in it? Or how do I stop Kevin from, hey, we have a great solution, a security solution in place, but there's nothing that stopped him from opening a browser, going into his Gmail account and sending himself a spreadsheet of all of our most sensitive clients in it. So there are agent based and non agent based solutions that you can layer into alongside your antivirus solutions. A lot of those things are kind of intermingled these days. But in terms of overall data protection, having that active data loss prevention is important, and then layering in things like a good backup strategy to ensure that you have long-term retention and recoverability and data survivability of any data that may potentially be lost. In addition to disaster recovery, to have that aggressive um, recovery piece and quick responsibility and maintaining continuity of operations within your organization to prevent against like catastrophic immediate failure. The other thing too is we still use the terms disaster recovery, and it's a good term, but I think that word disaster is a little bit of a misnomer because folks tend to think of disaster recovery and think fire, flood, act of God, hurricane, tornado. Um,
Right.
disaster in disaster recovery could be something as simple as, a backhoe knocked over a telephone pole outside and my data center has now lost connectivity,
Yeah.
or we had a catastrophic hard drive failure and now one of the shelves in our SAN is down. So I
So
think we
so
want
then
to make sure we take that in account too.
let me ask you then, because from your opinion, where does the client start? Do they start with that, putting together that, maybe that business continuity and disaster recovery plan, and then build around that? Or do we start with, say, if I'm doing a cloud migration, maybe we look at a full desktop solution that might encompass some of
Mhm.
that. So what's your advice for clients out there? Where do they start?
Yeah, yeah. Great question. So it's going to vary by client, right? And it's going to be depend on not only what their objectives are, but also what their level of technical maturity and the adoption of some of these solutions already is. So I'm a huge proponent of DAS, right? I think DAS is a great solution for end user computing to automatically get some of the security things that we've talked about, as well as, again, mobility by its very nature means continuity of operations, right? So the fact that I can send my people anywhere and they can continue to work as long as they have a device and an internet connection is huge for organizations that are going through these conversations. So to me, the planning and the hard part is more on the infrastructure side, right? And I think where a customer starts there is to really go through that self identification of, hey, here is what I have, right? It can't just be this big ball of stuff. So here is where my sensitive data is. Here's where my most important data is. Here's how it's all segmented, and then prioritizing. What is most important to us? What do we need back the quickest? Where do we have the lowest fault tolerance for loss? And the big caveat on that is, you know, there are providers out there who sell DR services, sell business continuity services that will tell you that they can identify that stuff for you. They can't. Do not trust that anyone outside your organization can come in and tell you what data is important to your organization. There has to be some internal accountability for, really understanding where your stuff is and what's most important to you, because no one outside is going to really firmly understand and without spending a significant amount of time doing some consulting work, be able to tell you where your most sensitive and important data is. That's something that every client has to go through that exercise, and they can work with someone to help with that process, but nobody from the outside can ever truly come in sight unseen and tell you like, oh yeah, here's your business continuity plan. We've already devised it for you, because they're just doing you a disservice at that.
That's a great spot to leave it at, because the next time that we get into this kind of part three of this webinar series, and I'm hoping that, if you're tuning into this, that you will stick around for the three parts. because the next piece is I really want to get into your DRAS, and not necessarily your DRAS, but your office in a box solution that encompasses the DRAS, the security, the infrastructure, and the desktop, and all of that together. How do we put this into a single solution that's going to make sense, right? So that's where I want to try to leave this off today. But man, Kevin, that's a lot of information to take in. And
Hopefully, some of it was useful.
yeah, dude, I learned a few things. So I'm happy to have this discussion, and I'll let you have any parting words here.
Yeah, no, as always, I appreciate the opportunity to be in these conversations. Appreciate Zach's wealth of contribution to our session today. Sorry, Zach, I had to take my shots when I can get them. But yeah, again, I mean, all of this stuff is really important, and these are heady concepts. And working with a partner, working with a partner and a supplier that you can trust going through these conversations, is of paramount importance. So, Derek, especially for you guys in the role that you're in, like that trusted advisor status that you can maintain with the customers that you have and helping guide them through that process, as the Cloud Sherpa name implies, right? Like that is a that it can't be overstated how important that is, to an organization of having that partner that you can trust who's going to help you navigate these waters effectively, and then they can work with a company like ours at Evolve IP to really understand that need and then help match that need to the solution. So I think this type of relationship and the way that can help customers ultimately slot into the best solution approach for what they're specifically looking to accomplish, whether that's end user computing, disaster recovery, business continuity, backup, data survivability, hosted infrastructure, not to mention all the stuff on the collaboration and voice side. There's a lot out there, and there's a lot to all of those individual things. So, certainly doing things like this helps, and love to be able to be part of these conversations, and then hopefully talk with some customers directly and start peeling back the layers with them and with you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your wisdom. I appreciate it. And Zach, man, you were great today. Thanks for all the input.
He
You're
didn't say a
welcome.
single thing wrong today. It's amazing.
Yeah, I
Glad I could
know.
help.
Well, look, and also if you put a question in the chat that we did not get to or our moderators didn't get to, we will follow up with you. We'll answer those questions and hopefully you know, give you the clarity that you need. But yeah, great topic and great discussion. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.